Welcome to this on-demand webinar, Accelerating Speed to Value with a Modern Data and Analytics Platform. This session is produced by Aberdeen Strategy and Research, a part of Spiceworks Ziff Davis, and sponsored by EXL in relationship to AWS Marketplace. Our panel today is Jim Raposa, VP and Principal Analyst from Aberdeen, David Hirschfeld, Chief Data Officer from Marsh, Vivek Jetley, Executive Vice President and Global Head of Analytics from EXL, and Ralph Severini, Global Leader Insurance Alliances from AWS.
Welcome, everyone. Let's get into today's panel. So, data or information, it's extremely vital for most or all businesses, really. But when it comes to the insurance industry, data is its lifeblood. Understanding things like risk, pricing, how to best deliver products and services, all of this really involves taking massive amounts of data and applying deep and effective analytics in order to gain valuable insights that are needed for success. So first, I'm going to address this first question to David Hirschfeld, or Hirsch, from Marsh. So Hirsch, in your experience with financial services and now insurance, what advice or key considerations would you have for tackling these integration challenges, both from a tactical and strategic standpoint?
Thank you, Jim. So I'll focus initially on carrier integration because I think that that's probably one of the more interesting and complex challenges that we have today. My background is capital markets, and we had similar challenges, 10, 20 years ago in terms of trying to get either trades, research reports, transactions, things like that, back and forth between ourselves, whether it be Morgan Stanley, other firms, and clients. We're confronted with about the same problem here today at Marsh, as well as in other insurance companies, which is how do we move away from, say, email, which is pervasive and traditional in terms of how we've operated, to a more digitized type of environment. And so for us, that's carrier integration. So that means structured data. That means APIs and protocols, messaging formats, in terms of how we pass data back and forth. One of the challenges we find, of course, is that even within a firm like ourselves, but also within our clients, there are many different ways of expressing the complex programs and policies that we're discussing and actually pricing in terms of our clients and the management of risk that they have. Those protocols that we need to have are important in terms of standardizing the messages, the taxonomies, the definitions, the dictionaries. All of that stuff has to be essentially normalized or harmonized to be able to have a consistent message that goes back and forth. We spent a lot of time on this. So there are a lot of tooling that goes with it, a lot of business knowledge, and there's a lot of alignment and coordination with our clients and with our carrier partners. And so that's one of the focused areas for us. It also is crucial to actually having a good data experience for the clients, for the carriers, and for ourselves. The more we digitize, the better the data quality, the more seamless the experience, and also the more efficient the experience. So we actually went across the board, but it's quite a challenge. Again, there's a lot of complexity with this. We have a lot of work to do ourselves, but also our carrier partners in terms of just harmonizing, coming up with all these taxonomies, these definitions, these messaging formats. So that's the work that we've been doing. And I turn it back to you, Jim.
Thanks. Those are some really great points, especially around the need to keep pace with delivering business value. You talked about setting those taxonomies, how important that is for data integration and for platform modernization. So I'm going to move to my next question to Vivek Jetley from EXL. What guidance might you provide to organizations that are facing these types of challenges, especially from an ROI perspective?
Thanks, Jim, for that question. And the question about, what's the return on investment in terms of doing some of these transitions is something that we get asked by every client, and particularly within insurance, as insurance is kind of modernizing its data capabilities. There's a huge amount of decision making that needs to happen in terms of what do you do first, what do you prioritize, how do you get the best return for your new investments. And our philosophy has been very simple. We basically advise our clients to stay focused on what we think of as the analytics value chain. So it's essentially going from data, so getting the best data, the most appropriate data, making that data accessible and usable in the best way possible, which is the data management investments, the investments into the insight generation, which is what's the techniques or the models that you use in order to make that data, convert that into non-intuitive insights, and then the investments into making the converting the insights into outcomes, which is where you start embedding that into your workflows and your policies. Now we advise our customers to kind of stay true to that end-to-end value cycle, and then think about what's the investment that they need, but always have a focus on the outcome and link back the investment to the outcome. The other big thing that we've been talking to our customers about is think of this as a portfolio rather than a single investment. So as you're investing in improving your data infrastructure, think about it as a number of different singles and then maybe a couple of home run balls or moonshots. And the combination of all of that needs to kind of get you both short-term results, which are incremental in nature, and long-term results, which are transformational in nature. So that's more or less the thinking that we've been pushing our customers into. The one thing that we ask them not to do is not to have a plan that is basically, a 2 or a 3 year roadmap transformation with all of the benefits coming on the back end, and everyone essentially doing that investment on good faith for the first couple of years. That type of a plan, we think, almost seldom kind of gets the results that they're hoping for. So that's something that we try and walk them away from, so to speak.
If I could add one thing to what you just said, which I think really resonates with us at Marsh. One of the things that we do to actually make sure that we're getting good value and to be able to quantify that down the road is to baseline our performance, different processes. And if we can baseline that, then we can actually say, here's the improvement that we expect from a particular incremental project or an enhancement. It really does quantify and kind of verify and give us credibility as we go further into the program.
I think that credibility, Hirsch, is the key, because I think that we think of it as creating the internal champions. We think of it as basically saying it's the evangelization role. You have to have that couple of early big wins, or even early wins, and then you need to create champions out of those, and then the others in the company, or the others that are kind of lagging behind, then start doing the adoption. So I think getting that early win is critical. And then what we've seen is that the successful programs take that early win and then parlay that into getting a lot of other people on board with the transformation.
Strongly agree.
Yeah, great discussion there. I love a lot of those points. Vivek, I love that whole concept of the analytics value chain. I think a lot of the mistakes I see businesses make is having sort of like a one and done or point approach to analytics. So I really like that focus on the end to end. I think that's key to success. So, we've talked about these challenges and we've talked about some of the ways that businesses can overcome them. But, what about the bottom line? In Aberdeen's research, we've seen considerable benefits in areas such as cost, scalability, and even improving security when businesses carry out cloud modernizations. So my next question, I'm going to first direct it to Ralph Severini from AWS. How does the cloud enable insurers to, convert data into actionable insight, and have that great quality and accuracy, and do all of this in a timely fashion?
Hey, Jim. Nice to be here, and Vivek and David as well. I reflect on your comments, and having spent some time both in capital markets and a long time in insurance and technology, I reflected on some of your thoughts as well, Dave, because I think capital markets has moved the ball on data and so much in the financial world, so much faster than insurance. Although I think insurance is beginning to transform itself finally, because it's so demanding and the data is coming at it so fast. And I think the brokerage community, the reinsurance community, the insurers are going to have to deal with massive amounts of data and then slicing and dicing that. All those things come to bear, and all those are consuming inside out data and outside in data. And I think it's up to us to work jointly. You, Marsh, ourselves at AWS, and of course EXL, in a combined way that's going to provide a synergy on not only how to gather, maintain, and organize that data, whether it's in data lakes and Redshift on the AWS side or a combination of things, but then how to use the tools like that we've developed over 200 different services and tools, essentially that can provide those insights into whether it's a customer driven insight or whether it's a actuarial or underwriting insight in terms of the risk. All of that's dramatically changing. And certainly AWS has been around for, like I said, 17 years, I think. And we're continually pushing the edge on the tools and the capabilities of that to share with our customers. So I'll pass that back to you, but love the discussion and love the focus that we're all trying to create around data.
To Ralph, it's funny talking about AWS being 17 years old. I still remember the first time I created my first EC2 instance, which was probably about 15 years ago. So, it seems both short and long when you say it that way. But it's interesting because, we've seen a lot of change in that time, since those 17 years in the way the cloud is used and in the way services are built and the way businesses like in the insurance industry use cloud technology, which is kind of a perfect segue to shift the conversation to one of the most talked about technologies around right now. And namely, I'm talking about AI or artificial intelligence. I'm not going to talk about using AI to create cool avatar images or to write your term papers or whatnot. We're going to stay out of those areas. But what we want to talk about is where many businesses are definitely making moves towards leveraging AI in order to boost and improve their businesses. In Aberdeen's research, we found that over the next 12 months, 37% of businesses are planning to invest over $1 million in AI, and 12% are planning to invest over $10 million. So there's definitely a lot of interest across all industries in taking advantage of AI. And when we look at AI and machine learning, AI and ML, they're definitely key drivers for the insurance industry. So, Hirsch, I'm going to start this discussion with you about AI ML. From your perspective, what's the role of chief data officers when it comes to accelerating the creation of business value by using AI
ML? It's a multifaceted question. Let me start with the platforms that we build. The platforms need to be able to support a lot of different personas and use cases. And so a lot of the use cases that you're talking about when it gets to AI and ML are going to be for data scientists and for exploratory research. And we need to have a platform that supports that. So our platforms, in the cloud especially, need to have analytics. They need to have a fulsome, platform that allows us to play in different sandboxes, to play with different tools in a hybrid world, especially. And then the second part of this is using AI, I think, in a variety of ways to manage the data itself. We can talk about AI at the application level, a lot of things there, but the one that it gets me the most excited is how do we use ML techniques, and it could be NLP, which is natural language processing, to process a lot of strings or text that goes involved with a lot of the programs and communications. To be able to digitize things, you need to have structured data, as I mentioned earlier. And to be able to create structured data, sometimes you need tools like AI tools that you can actually process that data and get it into a structure. We've done some pretty cool things there, and we're going to continue to invest in that space. And I think that's a great area. One of the things that we've also done is created synthetic data using AI tools. And the reason we need synthetic data is actually because a lot of the information we process today is very confidential. We talk about claims, for example, and claims can be at the company level, at the individual level, workers' comp, things of that nature. Cyber, it could be any type of things that are fairly confidential that we don't want to expose, and we don't want our clients to basically have the information going out uncontrolled. And synthetic data allows us to do the analysis while maintaining that confidentiality. One of the things that actually we were just talking about a moment ago, with Ralph, which was around the cloud and the data residency, we're exploring things about how do we aggregate data and push data around while staying in compliance with the local residency rules in the terms of confidentiality. How do we maintain that? It gets quite complicated, but we're using a lot of AI mostly ML tools to actually manage this. And we're still at the early stages, but it's a very, very exciting in terms of the future.
I think just to add to what David just talked about, I think there's one other aspect which is probably going to become more important as well, which is just the governance aspect of it. So where are you using your AI models? Who's using them? What's the permissible purpose? And the term that we have thrown around a lot, which is explainability. Especially with the regulated industries, financial services, insurance. Can you explain the outcomes, especially the adverse actions that are driven by the AI model, and is there a kind of a auditable track record to say how did that happen, what came about? So we are seeing a lot of, well, first of all, there's just tons of conversations about AI and how do you use it, but then to David's point, there's a lot of work that's happening in terms of how do you make it happen within the company, and then how do you actually start keeping track of the assets that you have and how they're being used to drive business outcomes.
And just to add a point, and I know David, you mentioned, or Jim, that we wouldn't get into kind of the academic part of this, but I think about my son. He's doing his PhD at Georgetown, and he's saying, "Dad, guess what? We're heavily involved in using Chat GPT and techniques like that to gather and do some fundamental analysis." And I think it also brings into context, what are the ethical kinds of approaches that some analysis of data might bring. And we were experimenting actually with Chat GPT, and we saw that some of the answers were just like, well, they didn't make any sense at all, but they sounded correct. And so we have to be careful, I think, in how we use some of these tools and what they're providing us, and then how we act on them. So whether it's ethically or just from a business concept.
The whole question about ChatGPT is really interesting because I think having played with it, like many of you guys, I think it has incredible potential. But I suspect that the more interesting question would be is it gets very narrowly directed within an industry or even within a company, so that they can tailor the types of questions against the different data sets, the different domains that they have. You're more likely to get accuracy and more reliability and usability. The other comment that was mentioned, Vivek, around explainability and governance, couldn't agree more. Black boxes are hard to kind of sell in many ways. It's interesting, but at the end of the day, when you're putting serious money against something, you do want to have more confidence. Credibility, we mentioned earlier, really goes with explainability.
Yeah, that was a great discussion, great overview. It's interesting, how quickly AI is advancing. So we've all messed around with Chat GPT and seen it work and seen it fail spectacularly. But we're not that far away from when just a few years ago the things that like assistants like Alexa did seemed almost magical, and now it seems very commonplace and not all that advanced. So in just a few years, I think we're going to look back at like these capabilities as just sort of the beginning as well. And I want to kind of get into the practical considerations because we're having this really interesting discussion about AI and analytics, but from the practical applications of how it's being used by insurance companies, Vivek, I want to ask you, based on your discussions with the Excel clients, do you have some use cases, some examples of the ways that they're using AI and data analytics to enable innovation?
Sure, we've got a few. And first of all, just to kind of close out the discussion on ChatGPT, we as a company that's focused on data science and helping our customers use data and analytics to drive value, we actually are benefiting from that increased level of interest because just the level of everyone, boards, exec teams, everyone kind of saying, okay, tell me what ChatGPT can do, tell me what generative AI can do. So the interest level is there, and I think it's a moment where we have the ability of saying, okay, you're interested by that, but let me now tell you what's actually possible, and more importantly, what's relevant. Now, what's relevant for our customers right now within insurance, I think of it as kind of getting bucketed into three categories. One aspect of it is the ability to actually transform a current activity that is to a certain extent human-based and make it a human plus AI kind of an interaction model. There's a ton of work that's happening in the area of virtual agents, and how do you use virtual agents to do customer management, customer interactions, and as you pointed out earlier, just the complexity and the sophistication with that keeps increasing. So think of it this way: if the earlier systems were very rule based and were taking your less complex calls and moving that over, well, now the bar just got raised a lot higher, because you can almost replace 100 hours of training, 200 hours of training with a virtual agent, and the virtual agent seems to be outperforming that. So there's a huge aspect of customer transformation work that we are doing right now using AI. The second bucket is on the area of unstructured data. So the data explosions really happened across all industries, but a ton of that data is not structured data, to David's point earlier. A lot of that data is basically embedded within claims forms. It's your video streams, it's video stream data, it's images. And there's an enormous amount of work that's happening today using AI models to be able to actually start extracting intelligence from those unstructured data fields, and using that either to supplement existing models, or in certain cases almost creating de novo models to be able to say underwrite risk, to be able to do cross sell, upsell, retention, what have you. So the work we've done, for example, within home insurance, is use aerial imagery data to be able to actually do underwriting using a satellite image or an aerial image, rather than having someone go there and do the underwriting parameters. Now, the third part for the use cases for AI ML is probably the most exciting, which is a complete transformation of the way a certain activity is done. And I think the most interesting thing here for me is parametric insurance, which is the ability to actually say, you know what, I'm just going to not go through the traditional underwriting models. I'm going to take almost my two co-panelists are both financial services industry veterans. It's almost taking the old, I'm just going to underwrite this, or take a hedge against a certain amount of risk, and writing that hedge as opposed to writing insurance. And we are seeing just a tremendous amount of work being done in that area. We're seeing work being done in terms of bringing in massive new amounts of data to create a digital twin for that particular risk class, and then underwrite that, use the digital twins parameters to start underwriting it. Now, it's early days yet, and I'm sure it's a long ways away from when a regulator blesses it. But just it feels like it's transformative in terms of completely going to the core of the industry and changing the way the industry works. So just to summarize, tons of interest across the board, be it in transform what I'm doing today, to help me take new data sets on, and how do I deal with it, to the moonshots. And that theme is kind of, we like where the whole conversation is going.
One thing you picked up on, Vivek, I'd love to kind of drill into. That third category is lovely. I think it's fantastic. The one that we're seeing, and I had some other earlier experiences with another insurance company, which is around satellites, which is around drones for doing exposure analysis, for following up on hazards and and other catastrophes. That's been transformational. It's faster, it's better quality. So looking at rooftops and seeing what damage there is, looking at after a hurricane or a tornado, that stuff is now routine, which is just amazing. If you go back, I think 10, 20 years ago, you would have had an army of folks that would do this. And now you can do it very quickly, seamlessly, cheaply. It's quite attractive. And that's all, AI and ML driven.
And
David,
by the way, I was
Go
sorry
ahead.
to jump in there. I was going to say, by the way, I was one of those legions of people. So when I was underwriting, I took off about a year or two to do some field underwriting and loss control. So to your point around, during the pandemic, we realized, hey, you really can't do a lot of this, and we can see where drone technology is going. Even in the war in Ukraine, I mean, basically, it's managing a war. So I think the capabilities that can be applied to insurance to be the eyes and ears, like loss control was always the eyes and ears of underwriting or doing the field underwriting. That's going to be translated into aerial imaging, like what Vivek you were just talking about. And then the back end of that for us at the AWS side and for yourselves and for our customers is using things like Rekognition, which does analysis of aerial imagery, whether it's for a plant that needs to be inspected before you get final cover on that plant, or for any other myriad of means, so to speak. And I also love the idea of the parametric insurance, although I see pluses and minuses socially to that. But we're certainly supporting that piece of the industry. And a lot of that came out of crop insurance years ago, where you get paid if there was a hailstorm, even if that hailstorm didn't create a claim. So we're seeing that roll over into a lot of other areas as well. More points for discussion. Anyway, I'll turn this back to David. I think you wanted to jump in, or Vivek. So sorry for jumping in there, but some great comments going on.
No, I love the perspective you brought, Ralph, and certainly, I mean, it's crop insurance was you're right, one of the early use cases for weather. Now, this is also where with climate change, a lot of this conversation is going in that direction of saying, look, this risk keeps on rising, and how do you actually start tackling it? So we've seen a lot of work happening in terms of managing exposure, understanding exposure better. There are companies in the space now that help you understand exposure, not just to your physical facility, but to the overall region, and how does that risk kind of come back in. And, I'm thinking back to the work that Marsh has to do, where you have to kind of take in all of this, understanding of risk of all of these parameters and go back to your customers and give them the right kind of an advice. I think it's going to be a very complex world. And I mean, more data driven than ever before.
And I think AWS is standing right in forefront, being part, the major cloud provider. One of the big risks certainly is systemic risk. So what happens if, let's say all three clouds went down or something of that nature? You would have a major outage event, and even parametric insurance wouldn't necessarily cover the cost of going out of business, because your suppliers and your customers are out of business if there's a systemic event. So there's some real areas of insurance and data that are coming to fore that I don't think we've ever seen issues like this really ever arise at the level that we're seeing it. So lots of challenges for the insurance industry and the management of all that data, that we're gonna have to deal with in the next decade.
Yeah, those are all great points. At one point where we might have seen it, because I remember, is after 9/11, with 3 to 4 days with no planes in the sky. There was a lot of similar. That was like all the clouds going down kind of moment. But yeah, no, those are all really great points, really great examples, and we're really kind of touching on a lot of kind of going where we want to go, because we're talking about these cutting edge technologies, about cutting edge use cases of things like AI, of image, of drones. So with all of that in mind, I'm going to address this question to Ralph, given you just mentioned AWS has a unique viewpoint on where technology, and especially cloud technologies, are heading. So Ralph, what are some of the other new technologies that we're seeing that are driving changes, bringing new opportunities, for cloud adoption, and especially for insurance business models?
Jim, it really runs the gamut. I think a lot of the adoption that we're seeing, it's certainly heavily skewed towards data, because it's the crown jewels of the financial industry. So for us, one of the areas we have is we actually have an AWS marketplace where you can procure services and solutions related to horizontal needs, like security in the industry. But we also have an AWS data exchange, and that is where you can share data sets that can be sliced and diced at the needs of an insurer. And then secondly, we just came out recently in the area of data as well. At reInvent, I know some of you folks were at, I think, Vivek, you might have been there, but certainly a number of the EXL folks, and I know a lot of the Marsh folks were there as well, or have been in the past. And we just released data zones and clean rooms. And clean rooms are actually an experimental area where companies, and certainly I see this true in insurance, where companies can share data in a guardrailed environment so that they can share that in a homogenized sense without necessarily being and having the guardrails necessary for security and safety for that data and protection. So there's some new ways, I think, about sharing that we might be able to, that will manifest itself in new services. Very early days along those lines, but you can see what Goldman did in their financial cloud as just an example of how capital markets is moving that data environment. So I'll stop there, and I could probably share some other thoughts, but sticking on the data topic, that's some of the new technologies and new thoughts that we're dealing with.
The idea of a marketplace is super exciting. I think that one of the comments that Vivek made earlier around governance is going to be super, super important there. Just dealing with data, as we all do at one time or another, inside of a single company, where you get into PII or personally identified information, sensitive information, things of that nature. It's easy to kind of get excited about the monetization. It's totally understandable. But the governance has got to go alongside of that. And, it's a two-way street. You don't want to be taking somebody's data and then, sometime later on getting sued, because it's in violation of some contractual or some other constraint, control point that's been released there. So I think that's the other side of the marketplace that, it has to be really thought through. I'm sure Goldman has done that. I'm sure others that are exploring this area are starting to kind of cross those boundaries. We're more focused on the nuts and bolts of just, putting a lot of our systems and the data that goes with those systems into the cloud. There's an incredible
It's monetizing the data for yourself, right? Effectively.
Correct. That is the monetization there. When you move to the cloud and you kind of move away from on-prem type stuff, the advantage is the efficiency that goes with this. The number of times we move data from one system to another, hops, is just incredible. And so the efficiency that goes, the monetization internally, as you just said, is the big win for us right now. We're not quite at the marketplace, although we have talked about that. If there's an opportunity, it's moving to the cloud. It's integrating, as I said earlier, with our carrier partners and our clients. Those are the big wins for us. And they all involved at some level, the digitalization, the cloud, the process efficiencies, the RPA, robotic process automations, that kind of are inherent with a lot of the the tooling today.
And I always think that the brokers and reinsurers have they have cross-insured data, across all environments. I mean, basically, you and the reinsurers, David, have the most accumulated data historically. So, from all the customers across a broad range that you're dealing with the insurance market and reinsurers. So, boy, you're at the forefront of exactly that, or potentially.
Thanks. Yeah, that was a great kind of a map of where things are going, especially around data. I love the whole idea of the data marketplaces. And kind of continuing this conversation around kind of interesting areas and interesting developments. Let's talk a little bit about the cyber ecosystem and cyber insurance, which is definitely a very interesting space. So David, I'm just kind of curious, what's your perspective on cyber and cyber insurance and how carriers should be thinking about it?
I'm actually not an expert either in insurance, although I've been in the marketplace here for 2 years now. But cyber is definitely not an area that I'm an expert in. We do talk a lot about it. We are leaders in terms of the cyber insurance space. We have assessments, which I think are just industry leading. So the assessments are where we spend a lot of time trying to understand what the exposure is for a company. I think that's where the money is right now in terms of just, can you quantify the risk? Can you actually structure it in a way that you can do your CAT modeling off of, that you can actually share that information with the carrier so they can price it appropriately, that the firms can understand how they compare against other industries and other companies within their own industry. So all of that is kind of the nuts and bolts of what we do in terms of trying to assess the cyber risk and support the clients in terms of the risk management components of that.
So
Yeah, so
I can
absolutely.
amplify. I can amplify some of that from what David talked about. I mean, we work with a number of our clients who are thinking about how do they reduce their cyber exposure and reduce cyber losses. Um, and the biggest shift that we've asked them to do, and the biggest shift we've seen in the industry, is adopting a risk management thinking towards cyber. It's the idea is of saying, look, I need to think of this just like any other risk, and I now need to adopt a viewpoint of saying I need to manage for my greatest exposure and make sure that there's the fewest odds for it. But for my small exposures, maybe I can live with that, or I can have my internal teams take care of that or manage that. So there's an adoption of the risk management framework. That's one part. The other part has been just this understanding of that the parameters for this risk are very, very different from the other business interruption risks that companies think about. And just understanding what those parameters are and how does that correlate to the actual losses is something that's still work in progress. So companies are now trying to bring that knowledge on, bring that data on, and then use that in order to manage their overall exposure. So we've seen a tremendous amount of interest in terms of managing that exposure, but the definition of what that exposure is and the understanding of what drives that exposure up or down is still something that is evolving. Now, there are companies that are coming out in the space which are bringing that data together. We've partnered with some of them, and I think that bringing that data together and using the data to show how that correlates with exposure, I think is where the conversations are headed, and that's where I think the interest level seems to be the highest.
What we've noticed is that some firms are more reluctant to share information in terms of their exposures and things like that. So we need to kind of facilitate that. If they have a loss or something of that nature, throughout the industry, I think that's where we can actually lead and provide more guidance. That actually is important in terms of the risk management itself. As we try and understand what the exposure is, we need as much information as we can get, not just from our clients, but also from the entire industry, folks that are across the board.
And by the
And
way,
I
David,
think
go ahead.
just to draw an analogy here, if I think about how consumer risk developed, right? Consumer risk developed with every bank basically sitting on their own risk losses. But at some point, there was this understanding of saying, look, we've got to pool our data together. We've got to understand, and that led to the credit bureaus, which was here's what the risk exposure is, here's what the write-offs are, and then everyone in the industry benefited because they were able to pool that data together. I think at some point, cyber risk will have to go to that kind of a model. And to David's point, until that sharing happens, we are all going to have to look at our slice and try and understand what the overall exposure is based on our slice. So hopefully at some point we get to a credit bureau-like model for this. Ralph, I'm sorry I interrupted you earlier.
No, we're both on the same track with the fact that cyber is so hard to get. Many of our customers are priced out of the market. We see the fact that we can work together and share data in an opt-in model as a real mechanism to work forward for the benefit of our customers who can't otherwise get cyber. And when they do get cyber, it's quite expensive. So it's one of the most expensive policies. Nobody really, from what I've seen, is exactly knowledgeable of how to take all this data and then turn it into a pricing and rating and underwriting model. It's so new, and it's vast amounts. Some underwriters are taking into account dark web data, combining that with their security AWS profile data, combining that with their business data that you would normally get in a submission process, and combining that and then trying to figure out what are the golden nuggets in there that are going to tell me, is this a good risk? At what price should I accept this risk? And should I give them a discount if they've enabled all the security programs that AWS has? So those are all the things that we're trying to spin out So, but this is a wide effort globally, and we need a lot of players that are going to participate, just like we need in other aspects of insurance. So I'll turn this back. Maybe David, you've got some thoughts, but Vivek, maybe you've been doing some things in this area as well.
Everyone's had a really great conversation around cyber and around all these areas we've been talking about today. I mean, we've been talking about the benefits of modernizing and leveraging the cloud for the insurance industry. We've been talking about the many challenges they face when it comes to modernizing. We've had a great discussion about AI and all the many ways businesses are using AI and ML, from virtual agents to images to figuring out claims. We've talked about cyber and cyber insurance and the new ways businesses are using data. So I want to thank everyone. This has been a great conversation. But before we wrap up, I'd like to get this is what I kind of call the sharing an Uber with somebody, elevator pitch, sitting at the bar. You're next to an industry exec and they want to know how they could be modernizing, how they could be utilizing the cloud, AI. What would be your 30-second piece of advice to them when it comes to taking advantage of everything we've been talking about today? And David, I'll start with you. What piece of advice or key takeaway would you give to another industry executive in that kind of situation?
I'm a data guy, so everything is from that lens. My advice is always when you're working with data, look at the holistic, kind of end-to-end pipeline, and then especially when you're focused on data quality, go as far up the the source to the source of the data that you can. Improve the data there. And it could be around the numerations, it could be around the processes, it could be around the communications and the educations. But the best thing you can do to really get your arms around the data is understand how it's created, how it's initiated. And once you've got that, then a lot of other things kind of fall into line. There's a lot of complexity. We talked about a lot of things today. But for me, it's always about understanding the pipeline and understanding where the data comes from.
That's a great takeaway. Ralph, from your perspective, what's your piece of advice to somebody looking to carry out these kind of modernizations we've been talking about?
Yeah, fundamentally, Jim, it's like you have to form an infrastructure basis to move forward. So yeah, that's where the cloud comes in, and that provides the agility, the elasticity, and the basis for being capable of innovation. And whether it's around data or other in your applications that use that data, and that's generic, but it really comes down in the world of insurance down to improved underwriting, being able to understand your customer more insightfully, and then being able to understand where your customers are going with things like predictive analytics, which I think are absolutely key. And beyond all that, I mean, it's about the culture of innovation. So the leadership and all, the rank and file of every company in insurance needs to have a culture of innovation established with some guardrails around that, of course, and with some executive guidance, but everybody's involved. And I keep thinking back to having worked with and presenting with the renowned Michael Porter about 10 or 11 years ago. Professor Porter, is like, he invented the 5 forces, the value chain, and it's probably and he just said, we need to push these applications, the insights into the rank and file so that they can make decisions not a week from now, but tomorrow or within the next hour or two. And that's our mandate as technology companies and as businesses.
So Vivek, I'm going to give you the last chance to offer a piece of wisdom to our panel.
So I think that the hypothetical conversation with an executive about how is it that you can create value through data and AI and analytics, I think it really comes down to, in my mind, about certain key choices. So number one, they have to, and investments. Number one, they have to invest in data, just like David talked about, getting the data available, making it usable, investing in really the data platforms and the data hygiene. Number two, I think it's a choice about the talent, the ability to actually say, well, what's my team that's actually going to start driving these outcomes What's the combination of internal versus external talent that I'm going to use for it? And number three is choices about the outcomes. So am I going to go for, what ChatGPT tells me I should try to go for, what I read about, in the press, or should I go for meaningful outcomes that my team's coming up with and saying, here are some good interventions? So the combination of those three things, the data, the talent, and the choices about where to play and the field to play, I think determines that success. We've seen enormously successful programs, and we've seen programs that have been launched with a lot of hype, which don't really result in anything. And the difference in my mind comes down to these three things.
Those are great takeaways. Boil it down to, focus on the data, build the right infrastructure, have the right team, and make the right choices. So that sounds like a lot of good advice. And I hope everyone, well, first, I want to thank our panel today. That was a really great conversation. We didn't really go over, as long as the conversation's good, it's the right amount of time to use. So I want to thank the panel. That was a great conversation. And I hope the attendees learned a lot about how the insurance industry can benefit from the cloud, from AI, and from all these new technologies and practices we are talking about today. And with that, I'm going to hand everything back to David.
Thank you to our panel for sharing their data, insights, and recommendations with us. Special thanks to EXL in relationship with AWS Marketplace for making this webinar possible. To find EXL's Property Insight solution in AWS Marketplace, go to the link showing here. Thank you for watching.